Shop by My Name is M. I received my very first Animal Crossing game from a girl I met at an art camp during summer. She was a bit on the quiet side, but incredibly talented. During our time together, I found out very little about her, as she was a very secretive person, but one night she did open up to me. She revealed that she was unhappy with her life at home. Her parents were strictly religious and highly controlling. They would not allow her to play computer games or watch certain TV programs. However, she had been hiding a Nintendo DS from them and had one game for it, which she loved, Animal Crossing Wild World. She told me a lot about the game. You live in a village alongside animals, you could decorate your home and design clothing, as well as treasure hunt, fish, and collect bugs. It sounded really fun. My friend was a strict vegan and was completely obsessed with animals in general. A lot of her artwork portrayed this. Most of the time, she would paint beautiful creatures roaming freely in their natural habitat. However, she would also on occasion create disturbing images of the same beautiful creatures being brutally attacked by mankind. She would paint their fur coats dripping with blood, or their wounded bodies sprawled out on the ground at the foot of a demonic human killer. She never openly spoke to me or my friends about this particular topic, and we did not push her to do so, but she would avoid us at lunchtime and shut herself away in her dorm. I found this a little strange, but people at art camp don't tend to be run-of-the-mill. Overall, I admired her for being so passionate about her beliefs. When we parted ways, we exchanged gifts. I had made each of my friends a small wooden animal carving during the last month of the summer. I handed her one. It was her favorite animal, an elephant. She was incredibly pleased with it, but what she gave me in return seemed beyond generous. She ran into her dorm and returned with a DS game cartridge which she eagerly handed to me. It was her only game, Animal Crossing Wild World. I was reluctant to accept the gift, wondering if she had taken it out of her own DS purely so she'd have something to give me in return for the elephant. But she insisted, telling me that her parents were bound to discover her DS at some point, so she was planning on selling it soon anyway. She thought I would really love this game, and said she actually decided to give it to me some time ago. Eventually I accepted. I told her that when we were older and had our own houses, I would return the game to her so she could play it without worry. She smiled and we said our goodbyes. Heartwarming, right? I returned home late that afternoon. I immediately ran upstairs and inserted my cart into my own DS, excited to start playing. I switched on the power, but to my great disappointment, the words, "There is no DS game inserted," appeared at the top box on the menu screen. I was unable to select the game. My DS is the older version, and I hadn't been playing in quite some time, so I thought perhaps it was the fault of the console itself. I removed the game cart, blew lightly on it, reinserted it, and started up the console. There is no DS game inserted. It took 3 attempts, but finally the game appeared on my menu screen. I was relieved and eager to begin playing. My friend from art camp had already created a town and named it Liberty, so I thought it'd be nice to move my character into the same town rather than starting a new one from scratch. As the game began, I found myself in a taxi on the way to Liberty Town, with the driver asking me questions and allowing me to enter my name. Upon arriving, I saw my villager for the first time. She was really cute, with large brown eyes and long eyelashes. She had a cheerful smile and her hair was styled into small ponytails on top of her head. My character automatically walked inside the town hall, and I was told where my home was located by the pelican lady inside. She informed me that I'd be sharing the house with my friend. I found the house immediately thanks to the map on the menu screen. It looked perfectly normal with a red roof and a mailbox near the door. Excited, I went inside. To my surprise, the room was completely empty aside from the wooden cabinet on the bottom right corner. My friend had told me that decorating your home is supposed to be a major part of an Animal Crossing game, and although I had no idea how it was done, I questioned why she had not added any furniture to the house. I thought that maybe she hadn't gotten around to it, or perhaps she had emptied the room before passing the game on to me, so that I had the freedom to decorate the house from scratch. She was a very considerate person. I approached the cabinet, wondering if you could actually open it, and sure enough, you could. There was one item inside, a portrait in a red frame. I moved my cursor to select it, and it showed the head of a white elephant character, clearly one of the animals in the game. It looked cute and made me smile a little. My friend probably had to do something special to get this item. She really did love elephants. However, the text box below the image was blank. There was no description of the portrait whatsoever. Being a newcomer to this game, I was unsure whether or not there should be one, but the empty text box looked odd. I soon shrugged this off and headed upstairs, where I found my friend's villager asleep in the bed to the left of my own, looking very peaceful. Her hair and skin were similar to mine, but her clothing was plain white, rather than a particular pattern or color. This confused me more so than the empty house, as even my own newly created villager wore a green checkered and black shirt. After exploring my home, I was met at the door by Tom Nook, the owner of the local store. He was a well-known raccoon character. He wore a white apron around the lower half of his body and had a laid-back facial expression with half-shut, dozy blue eyes. It was then I played through the game's tutorial. This is where Tom Nook asks you to perform a few tasks to get used to the game. One of the tasks was to meet the neighbors, the other animal villagers living in your town, so I went off to introduce myself. As I was exploring the town, the edges of my screen became unusually dark. It was nearly nighttime, however, so perhaps this wasn't so peculiar. The game's music was very faint and slow. I had to turn the volume to max in order to hear it. Even then it was still pretty quiet, but again, maybe this was supposed to occur at nighttime? After running around a little, I also noticed that there was a severe lack of trees in this game. There was literally only 5 or 6 trees in the entire town. It was as though someone had been cutting them down for some reason. The animals in my town seemed normal. Vista the sheep, Octavian the squid, Snake the bunny, and Chevre the goat. I found them all walking around not too far from their houses. They introduced themselves to my character each in their own unique way. I found it cute how the animals made little mumbling noises with every word they said. There were no other villagers outside, but in the far corner of town was another house. I tried to enter, but the words "no one is home" appeared, and it did not allow me inside. I went over to read the sign, which said Margie's house, leading me to believe I had missed a villager. I searched all over town for this Margie, but she was nowhere to be found. I returned to the store, and Tom Nook acted oblivious to the empty house. He gave me a few more tasks, such as planting flowers around the shop, and I was able to play the game my own way. My first intent was to make some money. As there were hardly any fruit trees around, I resorted to picking the flowers I had planted earlier, before returning to Nook's store to sell them. However, when I walked through the door, things were very, very different to before. Nook stood in his usual place, but his body was frozen and lifeless. His eyes were wide open, opposed to being partially covered by his eyelids as they were before. He did not greet me, or try to encourage me to buy something. He just stood there. On top of this, there was another oddity. There were almost no items up for sale in the shop, just sold-out signs in place of them. The only tool for sale on display was in the very middle of the store, an axe. I approached it, but nothing happened. I tried speaking to Tom Nook, but he too remained unresponsive. I was confused. Surely this was not normal. I believe that the items being sold could be due to my friend having purchased them all. The game must have counted us as one player, even though during the game's tutorial there were lots of items on display. But Nook's body being frozen made no sense. This was the first time I felt there was actually something wrong with the game cartridge. Or was it my DS? My friend had said she played Animal Crossing almost every day. Surely she would have noticed if the game wasn't working properly? I went home to save and reload the file, hopefully eliminating the weird store bug. You could only save the game by clicking on your bed, and the game would turn itself off afterwards. Upon returning home, I ran through the empty room and up the stairs. I expected to find my friend's character still asleep on the bed on the left, but to my great surprise, the bed was empty. This confused me even more. I hadn't played this game before, but surely someone's character shouldn't just disappear like that? Was this another glitch? I was a little disturbed, but also excited, wondering if there were any other bugs I could discover, so rather than letting my character sleep, I continued playing. As I mentioned earlier, my plan to gather fruit to sell for money had been thwarted by the lack of trees. So I headed to the beach to collect some shells instead, and it was there I came across Vesta. Perhaps it was the nighttime atmosphere which made me notice that Vesta was actually quite a creepy character, a dark-faced sheep with glowing eyes and a disturbing smile. She seemed to be walking away from me, but I caught up and pressed A to interact with her. It was that moment the screen froze. The music stopped completely, and I could do nothing but watch and wait, hoping it wasn't permanent. To my relief, after around 10 few seconds, Vesta's speech bubble appeared. However, my heart sank when her dialogue was far from expected. "Every meal of meat is the result of death. Bafoo," she said. What? I had to look twice to make sure I read that correctly. Vesta said nothing else. Once I clicked A, the speech bubble closed and she continued to walk away from me. I was a little afraid, but I summoned my courage and spoke with her again. "Every meal of meat is a result of death. Bafoo." It appeared that this freaky sheep character had only been programmed with one line of dialogue. I had chills. This was very over the top for a game which was supposed to be child-friendly. I watched as Vesta walked slowly in a straight line to the left and exited the screen. I decided to ignore the sheep from that moment on and hoped she would move out of town as a result. I had heard that animals can move out of towns if you don't pay enough attention to them. Then again, this game was not normal, so there was no guarantee that anything would work as it should. There weren't many shells along the shore after all, but I gathered 4 in total. I was still a little shaken, and I didn't want to play for very much longer that night. On my way back to Nook's store, I saw the Able Sisters design shop. It was then I remembered my artistic friend. She had told me a lot about this part of the game. This was where players could purchase clothes and umbrellas, or design their own and put them on display. She seemed excited when she informed me that you could draw whatever you like using the stylist and wear clothes you had created. I decided to go inside, wondering if my friend had created any designs for herself and whether or not I'd be able to recognize her handiwork. This thought made me relax a little, but not for long. I entered the store. What instantly caught my eye was the 8 shirt designs which were on display. They were almost identical, white horrible red splotches over them. The shade of red varied between each one, from pinkish to dark crimson color. The shirts looked as if they were covered in blood. One of the Able sisters, Mabel, turned incredibly slowly to face me as I walked through the door, whilst her sister, Sable, sat at her desk sewing. Mabel was an indigo hedgehog with large cheeks, and her eyebrows gave her a slight frown. Her overall appearance was visually pleasant, but her actions were far from it. There was a long pause as though the game was struggling to display Mabel's dialogue. It finally appeared. "Welcome to the Able Sist..." Pause. The game froze yet again for a second or two, then the dialogue box closed without finishing the sentence. It reappeared shortly after with the phrase, "skinned alive." There was no mumbled animal talk as the short sentence appeared, and it was shown all at once rather than letter by letter. Mabel's body then froze, similar to Tom Nook's. I moved my character around, tapping A to interact with the hedgehog, but she was unresponsive. I gazed at the screen, still pressing buttons, then noticed the hedgehog's head was slowly dropping. It tilted right as though it was too heavy for her body to support, then stopped in an awkward position. Mabel looked like a doll, with her empty black eyes and her expressionless face. Sable, however, continued sewing at her desk, but I was too afraid to approach her. I just wanted to sell my items, then save and leave the game alone until daylight tomorrow. Taking a last glance at the blood-splattered clothes, I left the building and headed towards Tom Nook's store. To my despair, circumstances were even worse than they were before. Nook was nowhere to be found. On top of that, the axe which was for sale earlier had gone, and was replaced by an out-of-stock sign. I immediately left and ran in the direction of my house. Forget the money. I was just gonna save and turn off. The music was now completely gone and replaced by nothing but a cold, unfriendly silence. The night in the game was dark, and the faded edges of the screen formed a single border of pure black shadows. It seemed to be taking a lot longer to reach the house this time, but how was this possible? I was going the same way I had before. My character ran for a good few minutes until the red roof finally appeared on screen. As I approached the door, I relaxed a little, thinking that this frightening experience was almost over. However, when I clicked to go inside, to my utter horror, the words, "No one's home," appeared at the bottom of the screen. What? It was my house. I could not go inside. As my character turned to face the camera, I noticed her facial expression was now somewhat gloomy. She looked worn out with faint shadows around her eyes and her pupils seemed to have shrunk. Her mouth was still smiling, but it was a very weak and forced smile. As I gazed at her, I was suddenly distracted by a faint tapping noise. At least I thought it sounded like tapping at first. However, as the noise became louder, it sounded more like a chop, chop, chop sound. Was one of my neighbors cutting down trees? Could animals do that in this game? It was also getting late, so the game was a lot darker than it was when I had started playing. This made the experience all the more terrifying. I could not enter the house, meaning I could not save the game or record my progress so far. I began to wonder if perhaps it wasn't such a bad thing. Perhaps I should turn the game off and never go back to it. Just then, I noticed the letter icon above my mailbox. I had mail, but dare I read it? I hesitated for a moment, but came to a conclusion that it was only a letter. It couldn't hurt me. So I dragged the letter from the mailbox into my inventory, and then opened up the menu and selected it. It said, "An eye for an eye, a limb for a limb. Love, Margie." It was then I noticed Vesta slowly approaching my character. She was almost robotic, once again walking in a single straight line. Out of curiosity, I let her get close and then tapped A to interact, going against my prior decision to ignore the sheep completely. I wondered if her dialogue would be the same as earlier. Again, the screen paused for a moment. I still found Vesta's face really creepy. Those demonic glowing eyes, that soulless smile. I instantly regretted my decision to chat. This time, when the dialogue box eventually appeared, Vesta said 2 words which were even more terrifying than her last. Blood purge. The game froze once again, then all of a sudden the screen started flashing erratically. I panicked. I had no idea what to do. My mind was racing as I ran around the village with the screen still flashing. The now unmistakable sound of chopping also continued. I was contemplating whether to just switch off the game, but my character ran further north. Margie's house, completely empty, could be seen at the top of my screen. My finger was hovering over the power button, ready to turn off the console if things got too terrifying. I jumped when I noticed another character appear on the screen from the left. It was Chevre the goat, who, unlike Vesta, came skipping over to me very quickly. Chevre was a pale, happy-looking character with kind eyes and a few freckles upon her face. Her appearance was far from threatening, but for some reason she gave me goosebumps nonetheless. I did not acknowledge her. In fact, I tried to run in the opposite direction, but Chevre caught up and spoke to me regardless. After a pause, the goat slightly tilted her head and smiled at my character, and then said in a single sentence, "I'm heading to the slaughter." This time, the game did not pause. The dialogue box closed the moment I tapped A, almost as though it was supposed to happen. Chevre remained in place, with her head still tilted, her pose resembled Mabel's, and her twisted smile still beaming at my character. I was terrified, my heart was pounding. I was really contemplating switching the game off, but I had made it this far. My curiosity got the better of me. I took a deep breath and decided to press on. I approached the empty house and clicked on the door. This time I was able to open the door without a problem, and my character went inside. The moment the door closed behind me, the screen was black for a while. I felt as though the game warned me, "You shouldn't have done that." After 20 seconds passed, I was beginning to think it was all over. Perhaps the house wasn't supposed to be there at all, and my character entering had stopped the game from working. Just as I was starting to relax and gather my thoughts, the text box suddenly appeared at the bottom of the screen. The text appeared suddenly and silently, not letter by letter. It said, "Fresh meat." Then the sound of chopping reappeared, growing louder and louder. The screen flashed twice. The flash seemed to contain an image, but all I could make from it in the split second it was shown was a black figure upon a white background. There was some sort of distorted limb, perhaps a tail, perhaps an arm, perhaps something else, spouting out of its upper half. Then the screen changed into a bright red color and froze completely. That was Chop. Final thoughts? All around very good, but with a better idea hidden within. I want to say off the bat that I did enjoy this story quite a bit. It never went too far overboard, and never had anything that directly affected the player of the game. I thought that the more subtle creepy things, such as the text appearing instantly and silently rather than letter by letter, is very effective, and even the idea of being stalked in Animal Crossing is pretty cool. However, I do think there was a better idea hidden within the story. Let's say that My Name is M took a different direction. Have nothing in this game that is impossible, like freezing or murdering and whatnot. Simply have the world that this crazy girl made. She could have all kinds of meat is murder and disturbing designs, become friends with everyone and change their sayings and verbal tics to something more disturbing, change the flag, all kinds of other stuff. Have it be about the crazy world that she made and how messed up it is without any of the murder or other things you can't do in the game, and I think it'd be a much creepier story. But that idea aside, I do think the story was very well written, with very few issues. That's it for this week's Creepypasta. Tune in again next Saturday when we read yet another Creepypasta written and sent in by the fans, with The Shadow's Revenge. If you want to read these stories early, help peer edit them, or even write one of your own, check out the description for the link to the Creepypasta section of my forum. You'll also find the link to the playlist of every Creepypasta I've read on this show. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, sweet dreams.